Hello there, everybody. Today we're going to talk about sourdough. Now, sourdough is a natural producing yeast that was used forever to make bread or anything that we would use dough to make. And it dates back as far as about 4,500 BC. They actually found some yeast in some old stone crocks and they were able to bring it back to life, which is very cool. But up to about 150 years ago, sourdough was the only way that bread could be made to rise and have that sort of yeasty flavor to it. And it's a completely natural producing thing that happens in our air and world. So basically what it is simply flour and water that is left out where it's warm, and the natural yeast and bacteria that is in our air reacts with the water and the flour, and it starts to eat the different parts of the flour, and that creates this bubbly, sour smelling / tasting mixture that when you add it to a dough that, say you want to make bread, takes a lot longer to rise than our traditional baker's yeast, which is only about 150 years old, but it still is a great way of creating some unique, wonderful, different breads and cookies and things like that. And you have to actually, or you can start it by yourself. But it takes about 7 to 10 days to get it to the point where you're able to start using it. Once you have it there, all you have to do is feed it regularly and it can last forever. Now, when you have your sourdough, obviously if you're not going to be using it every day, which is what they used to do, they made bread every single day, so it was something that was always out. They were always feeding it, they were always using it, but we don't do that anymore because we can go to the store and just buy bread. But because we might not be able to do that quite as regularly, let's see what sourdough is. And sourdough is a very science-related thing because all cooking has science involved to it. What happens when you heat something up to a certain degree, or when you cool it down, or when you cook it this way or cook it that way, different things happen. So sourdough can be put into hibernation, which means you simply stick it in the refrigerator and it slows down that feeding of all the flour and all the different aspects of flour that is in there that the yeast will want to eat and grow. It slows it right down and hibernates, just simply like a bear. Goes into hibernation, its body slows down, it's still alive, but it's not eating or functioning to the same degree that it would when it was out warm and doing life as it would. So that's what sourdough does. So I keep my sourdough in this lovely little crock, because since sourdough is chemical reaction, it can turn plastic or metal. It can start to eat it, and obviously we don't want those type of chemicals and things that we use to make those products in our sourdough. So this was in the refrigerator, and I just pulled it out this morning, and it is cold. So I need to warm this up before I can use it, before I can feed it. And I already stirred it in, because sometimes there'll be like a level of alcohol that sits on top. But I stirred it all in, and if you can see there's a little bit of bubbles and stuff happening on it already, even though it's just now starting to warm up. The crock is still cold when I touch it, so it has hours that it needs to warm up before that sourdough gets to a room temperature where I can feed it and get it to wake up. And if I smell it, I can smell a slight sourdoughy little scent to it. And if I were to taste it, it would be the same way. But we're going to make or start our own sourdough. So every day I will log back in and we'll look and see what our sourdough is, how it's doing, whether or not it's growing or not, what we need to do if it's not, what we do if it is. And we'll start to see how it grows. And then once we reach a certain point where it's now ready, because it's gotten strong enough, we'll make something with it. So a scale is a wonderful thing to have because you want to have perfect measurements. And if you just were to measure 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water, it would not necessarily have the same weight. So I have a lovely scale. Obviously you might not have one, and so you can still use 1 cup to get it started. It just might not feed to the same level, or might take a little longer to get there. So I'm going to use this lovely half-gallon mason jar, because I want you guys to be able to see how it grows as it's feeding and getting all bubbly. So I stick my lovely, see if I can, there you go. Right on my scale, and it's zeroed out, so it's 0. And then I'm going to add about 100 grams of water. Maybe I'll do 200, just so I can give it enough for you guys to really see. Now, traditionally, sourdough is used with rye flour, but you can use regular flour to do it as well. So that's 200 grams of water, which equals out about 7 ounces of water. And then I'm going to add the exact same amount of flour. I'm running low on flour, but that's okay. So I'm going to basically just plop her in there. Since I'm weighing it, I don't really need to use a measuring cup. Almost there. Realize how light flour is until you start to measure it like this. There we go. Half and half. So now that I have it all in there, I'm going to need to stir it. And because we don't want to use our metal or super plastic, you use silicone, but I like to use my wooden spoon. And so I'm going to stir it all together. Sometimes you can do it in a bowl first and then transfer it to a jar or something. You can leave it in the bowl. Okay, so this is the consistency of it. Some people will add more water so it gets a little runnier. Some people will add less because they want it to be more firm. And depending on the area of which your sourdough comes from, San Francisco is known for their sourdough. And the flour you use can change the texture of it. The water that gets used can change the texture of it. So you definitely don't want to use water that has been treated heavily by chlorine or any of those things. You would want to use bottled water or distilled water. Actually, bottled water would work. Okay, so I'm scraping down the edges because I want to make sure I can mark where it's at so you guys can clearly see it grow. So I'm going to use handy dandy green permanent marker, and we are going to mark the level of which it is. So when we look at it again tomorrow, you guys will be able to see how much it's grown. Perfect. Now you never want to cover it tightly because you want it to be able to breathe. You want that air so it can pull the natural bacteria into it. And so I have a handy dandy little cover because I'm a pro, and it is a cloth and it can breathe. And it just sits right over. But you could use cheesecloth, a little piece of anything with a rubber band would all hold it in there. And so this is the start of our sourdough, and I'm going to leave it in my kitchen just sitting out on the counter because it will stay warm. It's not going to be too cold. You don't want it too hot. And I'm going to let it sit. And then tomorrow I'm going to have another video so you guys can see how it started to bubble and grow simply naturally from pulling in the natural yeast and bacteria, and there's good bacteria that's in our air. So tomorrow I will see you guys again and we'll see how our sourdough is going. Have a great day.